Welcome to the Federal Tech Podcast, the podcast that connects you to federal technology leaders. My name is John Gilroy, and I will be your moderator. Our guest today is Patricia Titus. She's Field Chief Information Security Officer for Abnormal AI, and you can probably tell by the background, we're recording this in lovely downtown Washington, D.C. at the AWS Public Sector Show. 25,000 people here. Patty, what do you think?
I love it. I love the energy. I love AI is everywhere.
I tell you, I'm glad we grabbed her because she's running down to do some talking and run here and run there. We got to get this done real quickly, so we're trying our best here. I was at the keynote about an hour ago. A guy named Devin Love talked about a lot of different things, and he talked about architecture. Of all the silly, boring topics in the world, we're going to put people to sleep just saying the word architecture, but he talked about the value and the importance of architecture, and he seemed to focus on a lot of what the new architectures that AWS is promoting, but I think maybe with Patty here, we're going to look at some legacy challenges of going from legacy architecture to new architecture. So, everyone likes to dazzle with the new stuff, don't they? So the question is, what about this legacy value?
Yeah, so the legacy value is there. It's real. It's our tech debt. We have to figure out how to live with it in some instances, and in other instances, how do we consolidate it and simplify?
So you mentioned legacy architecture. So, something that David Levy said earlier, he said, today's federal government architecture is designed to handle email. Old-fashioned email doesn't have the strength and diversity and possibility to do different things. So let's talk about challenges with the security and this existing infrastructure.
Yeah, so I think what we're seeing is the old way of doing things. The introduction of AI has taken those legacy tools because they can only detect what they've been trained to recognize. So never before seen means exactly that. There's no rules, there's no signatures, there's no pattern match to trigger on. So basically you're blind. And so we need to get our systems to be able to handle the sheer volume of noise that's coming in and recognize what's really valuable alert versus what is noise. But what's worse is the possible combination of alert fatigue plus the blind spots. Now, this is happening in our security operations where there's so many different alerts and signals and telemetry coming in. The legacy architectures weren't designed for the volume or the velocity of modern federal environments, so they're struggling to ingest the data that they need to make intelligent decisions and, honestly, to be able to act in real time. But the biggest limitation is conceptual, not just technical. So if your entire security model was built around what we have seen before, you have no answer for what comes next.
Well, we call that old school in my neighborhood, so we're looking at old school here. Now, typically, what we look at is signatures and block lists, and that's great. You got a block list and block. So that just seems like 1932. It seems so long ago because everything's changing so fast. The dynamic nature of today's attacks, that's too old, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
So is that what you call a reactive approach? And you're suggesting of a more proactive approach, is that right?
Yeah, what we need to get to is where we stop looking for malware indicators of compromise because these 0 days are truly 0 moments. And so if you're constantly looking for pattern recognition, you're going to get lost in the telemetry. You're going to get lost in the velocity. So having something that actually focuses on behavioral analysis, meaning understanding and baselining what's normal, so that when something abnormal happens, you actually focus in on that instead of focusing on normal comms and how things are normally happening in your environment.
So from your perspective, what are the biggest limitations of this legacy architecture, especially if these never-seen attacks and they're accelerated by artificial intelligence? What's the biggest limitations you see?
It's human speed. Humans can only move so fast. AI is moving at a speed we've not ever seen before. So the AI-generated threats have infinite variation, which means I don't have to like pick a single type of spam email to go out. I can now craft the communication specific to the individual target I'm looking for on the other end. So it's no longer this spray and pray, which is what used to happen, where they would send a ton of emails out, they would hope somebody would interact with it. Now it's actually personalized to the individual, all the way down to the sentiment of the communication. So John, you and I are friendly. So I might say, hey John, in an email message to you, versus Mr. Gilroy. I probably wouldn't say that.
I prefer that.
But that's where we have to get more dialed in on that. AI has actually broken the economics of the defender. Attackers generating those novel, highly tailored threats for almost no cost. So these kits are available for free. Anybody, you don't even have to understand what you're doing to be able to execute one of these AI models. So it used to be we wanted our people to work harder to keep the attackers out. That assumption has to go out the window. We cannot assume that our people can keep up with artificial intelligence.
As I said, we're at the AWS Public Sector Show. There's 26,000 people down here. All kinds of events, all kinds of small workshops. You can go into a workshop and talk about anything. So just out of curiosity, I started looking for workshops on architecture. and I'll just bore you to tears with this. Event-driven architecture. Ingress inspection architecture, well-architected tools, a tech roadmap for AI cloud adoption framework. I mean, all kinds of architecture topics here. And I threw in this word tools because there are many agencies that randomly buy 5, 6, 8, 10, 15 different types of tools. So how does that integrate with this whole concept of modernizing towards AI? Do tools work? Do they conflict? Or how does this all work, Patty?
Yeah, so John, I used to be one of those people who bought 6 or 7 tools in the federal government when I was at TSA. So I'll tell you that this collecting tools, thinking that those tools are actually doing the job that you bought them for, they do. They actually do what you bought them for. What you bought them for was something that was 10 years ago, 5 years ago, based on our procurement cycle. So the zero trust is a philosophy that assumes breach, right? So you cannot implement zero trust on top of a security architecture that assumes a known perimeter. The foundation's wrong. We've got to change the concept. Cloud migration dramatically expanded our attack surface, and it changes what normal looks like. So legacy tools weren't built for that environment. They were built for the data center you're moving away from. So everyone's moving to the cloud. That's why we're here at the AWS Cloud Conference, right? AWS Web Services. So here's what I tell CIOs. Modernizing initiatives create transition risk. Now, this is something that we learned in the private sector a little bit ago because we're moving a little bit more rapidly in the private sector, perhaps, although I'm very excited to see the changes happening to our federal organizations. The period between legacy and modern is where you're most vulnerable. So in these architectures where you're split between cloud services or you're transforming full digital transformation using SaaS solutions, your security architecture needs to modernize in parallel. The problem is I have to have an on-prem solution and a cloud solution. That means, unfortunately, duplicative costs a lot of times. So think of it this way. You wouldn't move into a new house and then figure out where to put the locks. So security architecture has to be part of that modernization plan from day one, not a retrofit in the end. And unfortunately, security is always the last one brought to the table, even today with this volume of threats and the attack surface. And thank you to the media for raising awareness to the breaches and the things that are actually happening. It's helped us gain awareness for our executives, but it's a little too late. We've got to move faster.
One of my heroes is a guy named Dave Linthicum, and he wrote a lot of books about the cloud. And back in the day, he would write that all these vendors are taking their existing products and saying it's cloud enabled, and he called it cloud washing. Okay, fast forward till today, we see people like Gilroy Software, and they don't do anything with software. They say, it's AI software, so it's AI washing. So we see a lot of this kind of loosely fitting terms today. So how would you, for our listeners' perspective, help them differentiate between an authentic AI native platform and these AI washed platforms?
So I think you have to ask some hard questions. So one question I'd ask is, how long did it take your platform to detect the last major novel threat category? Time to detect on a 0-day or a novel attack pattern is the real performance metric. So that's one question you can ask. You can also ask, show me what baseline behavioral model looks like for an environment like mine. So a true native AI platform builds a dynamic model of normal. If they can't show you what normal is, and I'll tell you, a lot of vendors hide behind, oh, that's our secret sauce. That's BS today, and we have to be able to put that card on the table. So you have to be skeptical, and phrases to listen for would be like AI powered. Every vendor in this hall says they're AI powered. The question is whether AI is a detection engine or just marketing copy. And that's tough, because you really have to dig under the hood.
Now, today's normal is not going to be tomorrow's normal. And so I'm all for finding out what normal is, but that's a moving target. Is it Gilroy's relativity theory, or is it always changing and moving? So you have a baseline, and how do you define normal?
So it has to learn over time. So when you look at the newest behavioral models, there's a core insight. You don't need to know what an attack looks like if you deeply understand what normal looks like. So anything that deviates from normal is worth investigating, regardless of whether you've seen it before. So known bad is a finite list. It's never going to end. The problem is that it's in an infinite threat landscape. So known normal is a dynamic model that adapts to your as your environment evolves. One that scales, one doesn't. So your dynamic models are constantly changing, but they're going to change with you. If I'm using cloud, if I award a new contract to a new vendor, that's a new set of people in my communication stream. The federal context is super complex. So you have contractors, you have agencies, interconnected systems, hybrid environments, citizen services. You have it all. But that complexity is exactly why the federal government needs to move to behavioral baselines. The attackers are counting on what you don't know and you not knowing what normal looks like, and they're going to capitalize on that. This isn't a new concept for security, though, John, to be honest with you. It's a new capability. It's not a new concept. We've always known behavioral detection was the right answer. Now we actually have the AI infrastructure, that boring word, in the federal sector.
Well, I'll throw out a new concept here: zero trust. Zero trust is being talked and bandied about in this conference all over the place. I'm sure cloud migration is there too, maybe modernization. We can take those three topics and let's look at legacy security architecture. Does legacy architecture prevent the transition to zero trust or cloud migration, or is it part of it? I mean, this is a dilemma people have, because people in agencies don't have unlimited funds, do they?
No. I didn't have unlimited funds way back in the day. I doubt that's changed very much. So I think you have to focus on understanding what your assets are. So you have to know what you're protecting. So we've sunk costs in at some point. We've spent monies, and the fact that we spent $50 million on a set of tools doesn't mean that it's actually continuing to function in today's environment. That honest conversation with your leadership about existing tools that are good for what they were designed for. The question is whether they're designed for this whole modernization effort and when the threat landscape and surface is going to start exploding. So the more you push into cloud, the more you start using modern capabilities, unfortunately, you're going to expand your attack surface. So modernization, by the way, and I saw this when I was at the Treasury, modernization does not mean you're ripping and replacing it overnight. But what it does mean about being honest about coverage gaps and not counting legacy tools as credit toward the capability you don't actually have. So the return on investment discussions and conversations have to include the cost of a breach. So when you frame it that way, the calculus on modernization changes very quickly. The cost of a data breach, we know by the FBI's reports, we're in the billions of dollars that have been lost over the last 12 months because of data breaches.
We're lucky to have you in the studio here, the portable studio, Patty, and you're going to be downstairs and you'll be speaking at a couple events this afternoon. So let's say I'm sitting in the audience and someone asks a question about, okay, we got all these prioritization things to worry about. I mean, we got about zero trust, we got AI. So what advice would you give someone in the audience this afternoon who said, give me a checklist, write it on the wall, give me a whiteboard, give me 3 or 4 things to prioritize in order to make this transition?
So this has been on the tip of all of our tongues for the last 2 decades. You can't protect what you don't know, right? So you have got to focus on your assets. Assets are the most important part. And one of my old CEOs said, data is the new oil. It is an asset that you need to understand, and you can't defend what you don't know. The behavioral baseline and asset visibility are the foundation that everything sits on. So that's the first thing. The second thing is move toward platforms that make decisions, not just alerts. And you have to get a little comfortable with that. So as a paid paranoid, that's what CISOs are, we're having trouble getting comfortable with allowing something to make decisions. But we have to start with the low risk, low impact areas to allow deterministic to take its place of a human and take those humans and put them in a more important and critical capabilities that maybe you've had to not have as much focus because you've been so focused on the mundane and low risk, but they're coming in high volume. So second, you've got to make sure the federal workforce doesn't have enough analysts to investigate every alert. The federal government does not have a plethora of people looking at alerts. So AI can do that autonomously. It can triage and it can respond. It's a force multiplier you can't afford to ignore. And the third thing is to get serious about non-human identities like service accounts, API keys, machine-to-machine communications. That's where the next generation of federal breaches will come from. Most agencies have no visibility there. So we are not treating API like a human identity. We did ourselves a bit of a disservice, John, when we separated human from non-human identities. That has all become convoluted. It's all coming back together again. And finally, stop buying point solutions, for Pete's sakes. That era's gotta end. Every new tool is another console. It's another integration. It's another gap between systems. And agencies that will best defend in 5 years are the ones that rationalize their stack around a coherent architecture today. While it may seem architecture's boring, it's got to be foundational for everything we think about.
So, Patty, you're going to go downstairs, as I said, and give a couple presentations. You're going to have live fire. You're going to have these things called human beings in the room and coming up to you afterwards and asking questions. So what do you predict? What kind of questions do you think you're going to get from this crowd here today?
Well, I do have one session on is AI going to take my job?
That'll probably be well attended.
That is, and it's a conversation we have a lot because we're an AI native company.
Yeah.
And so we're constantly looking at, are we streamlining this organization? They're shifting these people into something different. Is AI taking over that function and capability? It is going to take the job of people who do not embrace AI. Those are the people who are going to find themselves on the short list for early retirement. Some people may be okay with that. I think people need to get on board with AI. It's not something coming. It's here. It's real. So I think some of the questions are going to be around what kind of training should I get? Where should I be focusing? Are we going to eliminate all lower level jobs? I don't think that's going to happen. I think if we're smart, we'll figure out how to balance that. Maybe we can increase our intern programs at the lower tier. We can take our high-valued humans and make them more efficient.
What we'll do, Pat, is we'll take these microphones and walk downstairs and follow you and see.
And how fun would that be?
That's a pretty good prediction for a question, though. Is I can take my job, and I think that's a question that a lot of my listeners are thinking about, and so maybe they should come down here and hear what your answer is. But maybe we'll save that for the next interview.
Sounds good to me.
You have been listening to the Federal Tech Podcast with John Gilroy. I'd like to thank my guest, Patricia Titus, Field Chief Information Security Officer for Abnormal AI, and we're recording this from the AWS Public Sector event in lovely downtown Washington, D.C.